So you get your first drone and you're really excited to put it in the air. And it's really tempting to just power on the drone and go fly wherever you want to fly. But it's not always legal to do so, and it's not always safe to do so. So there are a few things that you need to check before you actually put your drone in the air. Hi, my name is Steven with droneon.eu. And today we're going to talk about a pre-flight checklist that I've been following for many years already, and you should as well, to keep it safe in the air. The first thing you need to do is to check whether or not you can actually legally fly where you want to fly. Like, for example, it is pretty obvious, or it should be obvious, that you're not supposed to be flying near airports or near heliports or over prisons, over nuclear plants. But maybe it isn't always that easy to know where are those, especially if you're in a foreign country. Now, a really good tool for that and to know where you can actually fly is to have a look at the EASA website, where they have a page that links to all the different maps for each individual European country. I will leave a link below to that website, but it is really handy, and it will point you, for example, for Norway, you can go to the flysafe.no website, where you can see which regions can be flown and which not. For Belgium, it's map.droneguide.be. For Slovenia, which I've been looking into since I'm going there next summer on a road trip, there is also a website from the Official Aviation Authority. Really handy websites to start, and then you go to the local website, and there they will show you what exactly can and cannot be done in certain areas. So that is definitely something to look into to make sure that you are not flying illegally, because we all want to keep it safe and we all want to keep our freedom of being able to capture these beautiful landscapes or beautiful architecture with our drones, of course. So if everybody follows the rules, then we are all a happy gang with that, of course. Now, I did mention the Triglav National Park being a no-fly zone, and there are many nature parks that are a no-fly zone, but that doesn't mean you cannot fly there. So, for example, in Slovenia, you can request access to fly there, and then you have to fill a whole form with when are you going to fly, what are you going to shoot, why are you going to do it, what material are you going to use, and so on and so on. And then you have to submit that application. They will review it. It will cost you about, in this case, I think 22 or 25 euros to obtain a license or a permit to be able to fly in those locations on those dates. Now, it is tempting to just put your drone in the air if you are on a road trip like I am, and you don't have time, you don't know exactly when are you going to be in which location. It is very tempting to just put the drone in the air and shoot a few things. But more and more there is being patrolled against these illegal flights. So beware, keep it legal, and stay safe. Now, a second thing that of course you need to check is the weather. Right? If it is raining heavily, you're not going to fly probably. There are only a few drones, and most of them are not consumer drones that can handle torrential rain. For example, if there are high winds, make sure that you know exactly what your drone can handle and fly in winds below those speeds, and usually well below those speeds, because you will have gusts of wind that will drift your drone away from you. And if you have really high wind, you're going with the wind out, everything is going smooth, and then it's time to bring the drone back, and you're not getting back because the winds are too strong, and then you might lose your drone in that scenario. So also something you do not want to happen. Now, also related to the weather, and maybe a no-brainer for some of you, but for others something to keep in mind, is wear appropriate clothing. If it's really cold, you're not going to fly with gloves on the sticks, because you don't have as much feeling on those sticks when you wear gloves. So usually you fly with bare hands. If you're in really cold climate, your hands will get cold real quickly. So in between flights, make sure you have something like hand warmers or good warm pockets to warm up your hands, so you don't lose the feeling in your fingers, and you can still control the drone the way you want to control it. Now, on the other hand, wear a decent jacket as well, wind protection, protect your head from the cold or from the heat. Don't stand in the sun when it's really hot. You might suffer from a heat stroke, and then you cannot control the drone properly anymore, and the drone becomes a liability at that point. So make sure you wear the appropriate clothing. Now, before you go out to fly, make sure that you update your controller, because the controller also has an internal database of where it can fly, and then it will warn you if you are approaching a zone that is, for example, an airport, or if you are approaching a prohibited nature zone. The drone or the controller will actually warn you for that. Again, you can request exceptions via the DJI app and online via DJI, but it is at your own risk that you're flying in those regions. If something happens at that point and you are not cleared to do it, well, insurance might be a pain in the ass if something really bad happens. Now, don't just do the update an hour before you go out for your flight, because if you do an update on any device, it might contain bugs, and then you cannot control the drone in a way that you intend to or you want to. So do that a few days in advance to update your controller and your drone's firmware, and test it out before you go out to fly. Now, if you see an update popping up as soon as you want to start flying, ignore it and don't install it. Do it afterwards. It's perfectly possible, but at least you know that your drone will be fine in the air for the flight that you want to take. And then, of course, before you go out, one more thing to take along, and that is definitely some spare propeller sets. Because something might always happen, and if you damage one of your propellers because you've flown into a branch or something, or you crashed into the ground, if you're using an FPV drone, for example, well, that is definitely something that will ruin your day. So make sure you pack some spare propellers so you can continue your flight once that happened. And then as a last point, of course, make sure that your batteries are charged. It wouldn't be the first time that somebody goes out thinking the batteries are still okay because they charged them a week ago, for example. But these are smart batteries that will actually deplete themselves up to about 50% once you leave them alone for too long to protect the lifetime of the battery. So charging a drone, leaving it for 2 weeks and then thinking they are still full, it's not going to happen. So check your battery status before you go out. Now, these are the things that you do before you head out to your location. Once you arrive on location, it's still not just turn it on and put it in the air.
But wait, there's more.
First thing you want to do is to actually visually inspect the drone. You want to look around, see if there are no cracks in the arms, if the propellers are still spinning the way it is, if the gimbal is free and it's not making any weird noises when you turn it, for example. And of course, that the battery that you included is more than sufficient to do your flight. Now, once you have done that, the next thing is to make sure that you have a safe landing spot and takeoff spot, away from people, away from yourself, also to keep it safe, of course. Now, sometimes when you are in a crowd or you want to do a flight where there's a lot of people, just move 50 meters to the side, for example, like I've done here in Norway. There's a lot of people standing on a platform. I just moved away from the platform to shoot a few shots there, to take off and land in a safe position so that nobody is ever going to be at risk. I've seen others, just especially with those tiny drones like the Mini 3 Pro, just hovering, launching it in the middle of a crowd and hovering it over people's heads just to take that awesome selfie. Don't do that. Just keep it safe out there. And of course, you want a backup landing site as well. In case something happens and people come up to you, it happens. They ask questions about the drone, about whether you know what you're doing, yes or no, and whether you know the regulations, and they start talking to you, but you still need to fly the drone. It's always better to have a backup location like 10 meters away from where you are, and then you can land the drone safely there without putting those people at risk. Coming back to the weather, if it is really cold, batteries don't like to be that cold. So if you use spare batteries, it is always recommended to keep them in your pockets because it's a lot warmer there, and then they will stay warm and you will get a much longer flight time out of those batteries. Now, it doesn't really matter as long as it's like 10 degrees Celsius. there is no problem. It's just when you go into freezing temperatures, you have to take into account a cold battery will get you a lot less flight time. So keeping them in the pocket will definitely be a better solution. So now that you have turned on the drone and you're ready to start your flight, there's a few more things that you need to check on the controller itself. And that is, first of all, the return to home policy. You can either choose to let it hover in place, which is the best solution when you are flying indoors. You don't want the drone to go up 100 meters when you're flying indoors because it will hit the roof. You can do an actual return to home that it flies back to you, and then you need to set the height for that return flight as well. So make sure if you set the height, you will actually be above everything that is surrounding you. So if there's some trees that are 30 meters high, for example, make sure that you set it to 40, 50 meters to make sure that you clear those obstacles. And then, of course, there's the last option to just land in place, which is something you never want to do when you're flying outdoors, because you might be 200, 500 meters away, which is the maximum allowed distance by default in Europe. And then you need to retrieve the drone. So you want to bring that drone, in that case, to you instead of having it land. If you're flying indoors, again, landing on the spot might be a good option if you have a free landing spot guaranteed. Like, for example, I did some flights for a commercial that I did for a gymnastics club. If I was flying above one of the gymnastic devices, I was not going to come down automatically. So hovering in place was the optimal solution there. So it needs to be seen. In most cases, if you're flying outside, return to home is okay. Landing is never okay, because if you're flying over water, it will land in the water at that point. I briefly mentioned already the legally allowed maximum distance, but there is also a legally allowed maximum height. So you should always be flying in the open category with visual line of sight. You need to see the drone at all times, or use a spotter that sees the drone for you, and maximum of 500 meters away from you with maximum height of 120 meters. Those 500 meters can be a problem sometimes when you want to use the active track and you want to follow a car. 500 meters are covered very quickly in that scenario. So in that case, it is allowed to use active track to do that. And active track devices should be a maximum of 50 meters away from the object that it is tracking at that point. So if you're riding a bike, for example, you can shoot yourself for kilometers on end. There's no problem. But in that case, those 500 meters will have to go higher and a lot higher, because otherwise the drone will just stop after 500 meters and you cycle on or you drive on with the car, and the drone just hovers in place at that point because it's not allowed to travel more than 500 meters. Now on the Mavic 2 Pro, there was an option that the 500 meters was away from the controller. You don't have that on the Mini 3 Pro, for example. I'm not sure about the Mavic 3, but definitely this is a reason why you should not always set the maximum distance in the controller to 500 meters, because you might travel further, but not 500 meters away from you. And then one last piece of advice is, before you actually take off, you wait for the message that the home point has been updated. That means that you have enough satellites or enough satellite connections that the GPS is really accurate on this drone. And that is really important, because if you have a wrong GPS coordinate and you start flying too soon and suddenly it thinks it's somewhere else, the drone might actually fly away because it thinks it's a different location, wants to go back to the intended location. And it can be hard to bring the drone back from that point, especially since these drones, all the new drones, you cannot set them to attitude anymore, which means that you cannot disable the GPS. On older drones like the Phantom, you could set it to ATTI mode, and that means that there is no GPS support, and then you could bring it back easily. But with newer drones, it's always GPS supported, so that is definitely something to keep in mind. Just wait for 20-30 seconds until the controller actually talks to you and says home point has been updated, and at that point you can just fly and it will have a locked GPS position. So you see, there's a lot that involved in flying a drone safely and legally. So I would advise you to use this checklist, make sure that you don't lose the drone, make sure that you fly legally, make sure that you fly safely, and then all of us will be a happy bunch of drone operators. As usual, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and make sure you click that little bell icon so you don't miss out on any new videos. And for now, thanks for watching. Until next time, drone on.